I'm John Banther, and this is Classical Breakdown. From WETA Classical in Washington, we're your guide to classical music. In this episode, I'm joined by WETA Classical's Bill Bukowski, and we're exploring a requested composer, Leoš Janáček. He had such a unique sound, so we explore two specific areas that might help explain his originality and even how humans communicate. Also, we explore his life, which did not follow the same path as many others. From having to practice on a piano he drew on a table, to being out of step with German culture, and finding musical success much later. Welcome back, Bill. It is great to have you again on Classical Breakdown. It has been a minute, but you're also one of the busier hosts here. You've got a longer midday shift, you got the overnights you're doing, the choral showcase and everything, but I'm happy you are here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
We have had actually a few recommendations to explore the life and music of this composer, Leoš Janáček. One from Teresa K. She wrote in a long time ago. I'm so sorry it's taken so long, Teresa. I hope you're still listening. And we've had several YouTube comments as well, and I am going to be responding to those. I found out we have a bunch of those. But I think people want to know more about this composer because his music can sound so different or just so original in ways we don't quite see from other composers that we typically explore. Maybe also unlike other composers, Bill. I mean, how do we even say this person's name? Janáček? I mean, I'm going to have a hard time with this one. What do we do?
The first rule in the Czech language, and I'm not a native speaker, although my wife has some more background. Her folks came from Czechoslovakia. The accent is always on the first syllable.
Okay.
So first name, Leoš, and it gets the esh on that because there's a hot check over the s.
Okay.
Hot check over the s is sh, over the c is a ch, and over z is zh. So Leoš, and then last name Janáček. The a, the accent aigu over the a is not a stressor. It doesn't mean that's where you stress it. That means it's a voicing indicator. So instead of a, it would be more like ah.
Oh, okay.
So, and then of course the hot check over the C, ch, so Janáček is how it's says. So Leoš Janáček.
Okay, Leoš Janáček. And I also heard a good helpful hint is you add a little bit of length to the na, to the Janáček.
Yeah, it's more like more like that. But it's a little tough for us native English speakers to get that in. I mean, try saying Bejik Smetana's first name. It's almost impossible to say it completely precisely because of that urge sound.
Oh, yeah. I say it wrong every time, and I have no problem with that.
Well, don't worry about that either because the truth is that they send kids to remedial school in the Czech Republic just to pronounce that hot check over the R. The Slovaks had it right. They just eliminated it.
Okay, I was going to say, this is a language I know the least, especially, I know French much more than this. And it's also culturally and geographically, it's an area I'm not so familiar with, but I know you have more experience with. So I'm very excited for this. And why don't we start, like usual, at the beginning for Leoš Janáček. He was born July 3rd, 1854, born in Hochwalde.
You got it.
Okay, let me know when they're wrong. He's born in Hochwalde in Moravia, which is in the eastern part of what we call Czech Republic. He had an early experience with music, particularly with singing. He was singing in a choir at St. Thomas Abbey in Brno. And soon after he starts doing that, like as a teenager, he gets interested in organ and piano. Apparently he excels at those, and he enrolls at the Prague Organ School in 1874. He's actually 20 now, so that might give you a little clue as to, he's a slow developer here. That happens when he's 20, and it also points to a moment, Bill, that I think is important in that we learn that Janáček is basically impoverished. He goes to this school, but he doesn't have a piano or organ to practice on, so he draws one on his table in his room. I mean, you play guitar, right? I mean, you're going to go practice guitar with no strings.
Well, there's air guitar, but some of us are better at that than others.
Or Guitar Hero.
So table piano or whatever. So there was another story. Sergei Rachmaninoff, when he was coming over here to do his first concert tour, didn't have a piano, but he had like a cloth piano, and that's what he practiced on.
Yes. That works for a couple days on a boat. not for a student. So thankfully a teacher saw, and we can't accept people to the school and then have them practicing on instruments they draw on a table. That's crazy. So someone does get him anonymously a piano delivered to his room who believed in him, but he's already having a rough time the next year. He leaves a scathing review of a teacher's performance in a journal, which also might be an early clue as to his personality, Bill. He seems like one that was
A little spiky, yeah. He was a little not cantankerous. He got that when he got older, but he was a little abrupt.
He was a little abrupt already from the beginning, and he eventually returns to Brno, and he's doing what composers and musicians did then, and now he is just trying to live. He's got a private studio where he's teaching, he's gigging, and he becomes a choir master. He gets a small job at Beseda Brnjska. I think that's right.
Beseda Brnjska.
Okay.
So, but you can just say Beseda Philharmonic Society. I think that'll suffice.
Okay, Beseda. Okay, so that happens when he's now in his 20s, and his interest in composition grows. And this is when we can look at an earlier work of his called Plowing or Oranje. When I hear that, Bill, it makes me think the sound is very proud. It's standing upright. It's rigid in a prideful way, and it kind of reminds me of like a Bach chorale. It repeats and the dynamic changes. I mean, this does not sound like the Janacek I think we find much later on.
Right. Yeah. Although it does have that sort of proud to be who he is element of it. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's interesting too is that his choral music, like Bach, for example, was very devout. Mm-hmm. Janacek was not. He was never a very pious religious person. He was attracted more to the texts for what they said to him or what they said to what's going on at his time, or he would relate them to other works of art that he saw. One of his earliest choral pieces that I really love is the Otche Nasz, which means Our Father, a beautiful setting of the Lord's Prayer. It's just one of a lot of sacred pieces that he wrote when he was a choir master and music director in Brno and at the Beseda Society. And of course, much later on, there was his masterpiece, the Glagolitic Mass. He was not, again, a pious man, but he was attracted to those sorts of things. One time somebody said when they listened to the Glagolitic Mass, "Oh, from a very pious old man," and he says, "Not pious, not old."
So he's already developing some of these ideas that would come later, like in that Mass you talked about. And he's just doing his thing. But he does try to continue his studies again. In 1879, he goes to the Leipzig Conservatory to study piano, and it sounds like that's for one semester. And then he goes on to another conservatory, Vienna Conservatory, to study for a few months there. And this is something, I think sometimes people have a harder time fitting in or finding the right place, even now. And especially in conservatories, it's not unusual for someone to study somewhere for 2 years and then go somewhere else for 2 years. But once in a while, you see someone it seems like they're having a harder time and they're jumping around a lot. They're not able to find, one teacher they stay with, but rather they just kind of wander around a bit.
Well, this also points to something else, and we're going to come back to this repeatedly. That's also a part of his character. Janacek was from Moravia, from this tiny little town sort of in the hinterlands. He was basically from the sticks. So when he went to more cosmopolitan areas like Prague or Vienna, he was sort of the outsider, the country bumpkin. So he had to do more to sort of assert himself in an area where people were kind of looking down on him a little.
Okay, so he already had things up against him besides being maybe impoverished just culturally as he's trying to go to a big city. And I can imagine if you're from the hinterland and you're going to Prague and then Vienna especially.
Right. As talented as he was, and he was obviously talented even at a very early age, it was hard to get people to take him seriously.
There is another work we can think about from this time. thema con variazioni, a theme in variations that is also called Zdenka's or Zdenka's variations. Now, Bill, when I hear that, I hear Janacek, in a way, trying to fit in musically, as you just, told us. We hear he's having these difficulties culturally, maybe because of where he's coming from, but he is trying to fit in, I think, musically, and I think we can say that because we know what comes much later on, decades later. But this sounds like he is trying to color in the lines, do what his teacher said, and write a theme in variations that is publicly maybe acceptable or more palatable, it seems.
But what's interesting, too, and you'll pick this up as you listen to more Janacek's music, how much it sounds like Janacek. That's one of the great things about Janacek. He doesn't sound like anybody else, and nobody else sounds quite like him. And you can even hear that in his earliest works.
And there are some other piano works, too, right, of Janacek. In the Mists is one.
That's a lovely piece in the Mists. It's reminiscent of Robert Schumann's Kindersehen, and it's sort of a nostalgic. The other thing, too, is that it sounds kind of misty, shifting tempos and key changes and everything. It was one of the works that he wrote following the death of his beloved daughter, Olga, which we'll talk about later. The other one is On an Overgrown Path. There are two collections of these, and this is music that you can just sort of get lost in. It's really beautiful, unbelievably beautiful.
And he's like 25 years old, and a couple years later, he does return to Brno, and then he actually marries one of his students, Zdenka Šulcová.
Yeah, Zdenka Šulcová, yeah.
So this is one of the more unfortunate things about Janacek that maybe isn't talked about much. It's something that I was actually not aware of. But he marries Zdenka. He is 27. She is 15 years old when they get married in 1881. And a common reaction that I've read online, and you see it, sometimes people will say, oh, these young women or girls, they were married off young, and that's just how it was. But the more I read about this, it's just not historically accurate when we're talking about Europe. It was actually pretty rare for someone of age, a girl of age 15, to be married in Europe. It was actually more common after your 20s, approaching your mid-20s. So he was 27, and he had already been teaching her for some time, since she was 12. And we have those Zdenka's variations that we heard a little bit before. And I think part of the reason why there's not so much scandal, because there has been another composer that did something similar. They actually had to leave their country. But this also might be because of her father. He was actually helping Janacek get some of these teaching positions and work, and maybe it was Janacek looking and seeing, this is my middle class life opportunity to get in. So there is that aspect there, but unfortunately, as we read in her memoirs, that it was not a happy marriage. She was very controlling, and even not giving enough money to feed the kids, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is we'll find out that Janacek had a roving eye, let's just say.
Yes. So he gets married, and then he starts an organ school in Brno, and this would actually, a couple of decades later in 1919, become the Brno Conservatory. And now he's focusing in more on composing, and he's using a specific source as well. Starting in the 1880s, he starts to collect and study folk music. And it seems like he's following in the footsteps of other composers like Dvorak or Smetana, understanding that the importance of using folk material in your sound. I mean, Dvorak pleaded with us in the 1890s in the United States to do the same. And I assume it's possibly because of their identity and also this music coming from further west in Germany. They have this idea, well, this music doesn't sound like us. It is not our music. And Janacek, for example, starts to study folk music to incorporate that into the sound of his music.
Yeah, Janacek was part of the generation, too, that came of age and was working at a time when a lot of the countries that were part of the wider empires, like Austria-Hungary in this case, wanted to, there was like a nationalist movement. They wanted to come to something that had sounded more like them and not so much like German or whatever.
Yeah.
And Janacek was one of those, Bela Bartok and Zoltan Kodály in Hungary. And then later on in the 20th century, it hit America. Aaron Copland was a perfect example of that, too. It was just a way of sort of finding something that sounded more uniquely like they did and their people.
And it's not just in the literal sound of the tones, but also in the material he wants to use. Like for an opera, for example, there's his first opera, Šárka, that is composed in 1887, and it's around the legendary Czech figure, Libuša, who was leading her country in what is called the Golden Age for women. And this is something I don't know too much about, but this was probably also significant for the people there, but I imagine in Germany, they're not going to want to put an opera on about Libuša, some Czech.
It wouldn't mean the same thing to them. No. Šárka came of age afterwards. One of the great foundational myths of the Czech peoples is Libuša. She was the founder of the Czech peoples and the Czech nation. And it's rare in a lot of cultures for a woman to be sort of that figurehead. And she goes back so far in the myths that it's hard to authenticate whether or not she actually existed. I think the biggest thing I can compare to would be maybe King Arthur in England. Whether he existed or not, his legend looms large in the founding of the country. She was the founder of the Přemyslid dynasty, which it was the dynasty that gave the future dukes, the most famous one, of course, being good King Wenceslas, and the founder of the city of Prague. Prague meaning threshold. In Czech, it's Praha. So Praha is how you say, the Czechs say Praha, we say Prague.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So this would have been much more identifiable to the people, but this was something that was not performed until much later, 1925, when he's like 71 years old. And this interest continues for the rest of his life, but again, we're going now forward into the 1890s. He is, in his 40s, and actually approaching now into his 50s, I think. He has an interest in this Moravian folk music that I do think we find their sounds popping into, especially smaller works like something for piano. We have this piano arrangement of I, Dane. And I could be totally off, Bill, but when I hear that, one, that sounds so folk-like, but it also reminds me of maybe mistakenly like a mazurka, some type of dance that Chopin would write.
Yeah, it has that sort of broken rhythm, or
that's it, yeah.
Like the Austrian Ländler, sort of not quite a waltz, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of a broken dance. It sounds very country.
Yeah. And the title, I, Dane, means, hey, come on. It already sounds like you're being invited to a dance. And I think this also is a good demonstration of some of the style that we get to know more of from Janacek, particularly with how he uses accompanying lines. There's a lot of repetition, sometimes just a note repeating, and then there might be a fragment of something repeating, like an ostinato. And then something else above that is able to just kind of dance on top. And I think those are some of the Moravian folk tune accompaniments that are finding their way into his arrangements. But he is also very critical of composers, German composers like Richard Wagner. He has this and develops this deep love of Russia and Russian culture. He actually goes and he sees Tchaikovsky, I think in 1888. And this does creep into his music as time goes on, these inspirations. He starts a culture group called Russian Circle, who I think the authorities kind of have an eye on, too, as well. But maybe you can put this into more of a context for us, Bill, because even I was looking at a map, and it's like, well, it seems like he's on the western side of what is this influence, and then you have more Germany over there. Maybe there's something budding up.
Yeah, he's sort of more, where he came from is more the central part of Czechoslovakia. The Prague and Bohemia, that part of what we call now the Czech Republic, is a little more to the west. Where he's from is Moravia, which is very close to Slovakia, Poland, Ukraine, and even Russia. And this points to something that was a really big part of his art and his culture and his creativity. He wanted to sort of do this sort of pan-Slavic idea. And so he was attracted to all these musics and he wanted to work it all in. Even to the work we talked about a little earlier, the Glagolitic Mass, he's using Old Church Slavonic, the language that was brought to the Russian peoples by St. Cyril and Methodius. And that's pretty much what he was all about.
As you're explaining that, it makes me think of, maybe opera and stuff in Italy, the music of Vivaldi that then has its influence and the whole world of opera creeps up through France, Germany, Spain, Switzerland, into New England. You have this whole geographical area. And there's this whole Slavic geographical area of which he is drawing on Janacek and also presenting this music to.
Yeah, there was an orchestral work that he wrote that's one of his more better-known works called Tarash Bulba, based on the Gogol tale about a Ukrainian hetman whose family was basically crushed by the Poles during an uprising. So it's very much a pro-Russian and pro-Slavic thing.
But something to notice is now he's like in his 40s. We've not talked about a single big premiere, no big success or like an international tour. Basically, like all of his success, that would come much later on in life. So even now, in his 40s, he's not seeing that. And in fact, I think his 40s actually get, dark and more difficult. And I'm wondering, is this a hindrance for Janacek wanting to write in this style with what might be a more German-influenced time?
Well, that's pretty much everybody looked to Germany. Even Dvorak throughout his life and career was urged to become more German, write stuff that was more in the style of Brahms. Mm-hmm. And Dvorak resisted that with every fiber of his being for the most part, and very successfully. He could because he was so successful. For Janacek, he knew what he wanted to do. And where he came from, he didn't have those sort of cosmopolitan ties or anything like that. But it was always, as we said, a constant struggle with getting people to kind of respect where he was coming from. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to promote the musics and the sounds and the culture of his own land.
Yeah. What is, I think, a little funny, this kind of reminds me about the previous episode we just did on Also Sprach Zarathustra, and we dove into the Nietzschean philosophy as Zarathustra comes down. He wants to release these people, the Hinterwäldlers, the backworld Hicks. They wants to break them free of their bonds and free them. And yet now we have all these people from the city running out to the countryside with their recorders, with their Edison machines and notes and paper. Hey, sing that song for me real quick.
Right.
We want to preserve that.
And get it down before it's gone. Even in England, Vaughan Williams and Holst went out. They spent their summers going out and collecting folk music and writing it down. Bela Bartok in our country, Alan Lomax going out into the field and recording these works.
And Janacek is also aware of what's happening around him in the moment, not just the folklore past. And I think that's been kind of evident by what we've heard so far. But it becomes really evident in 1905. He writes this piano piece, 1X or 110, 1905. And it's also known as From the Street. And he wrote this in protest after a 19-year-old carpenter, František Pavlik, was bayoneted to death by an Imperial Army soldier. And that event happened at a demonstration where, young people were demanding a university in the Czech language. He is killed. Then there's a bigger demonstration that Janacek took part in. 80,000 people in the streets during this young man's funeral, and he writes this response piece, 1905, From the Street.
Yeah, like most Czechs of his time, Janacek had no great love for Austria-Hungary, the empire that had been ruling their homelands for centuries.
Mm. And this is one that we actually almost lost because he actually went and like burned one of the movements and then threw it all in the river, in the Vltava River. And there's a quote him saying, like regretfully, and it floated along on the water that day like white swans. But thankfully, someone did have a copy. 20 years later, 1924, a copy of the manuscript popped up. So thankfully, we do have it. But
thank the Lord.
he threw away a lot of things, like many other composers. But in his 40s, this is, again, I think I said before, there's more difficulty. And one of them is his daughter Olga gets sick and passes away. And this leads to his 1916 opera, I think. Now he's 52, Yenufa. And this would be his big success, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was one of a number of works that he wrote following the death of his daughter. She figures very prominently in that. And Yenufa was his first big success.
And so now he's 52, and he's now for the first time experiencing what, maybe Mozart experienced when he was 13, 14. I mean, some composers are dead by this point. Brahms already had a symphony, at least maybe two by 52. Now he's just getting his first thing out there. And with his first taste of success, as you said, he's got was it roving eye or roaming eye, something like that.
A roving eye.
Roving eye. He starts a relationship with a singer. This leads to his wife, Zdenka, making an attempt on her own life. And then, thankfully, just separating from him physically. They were separated from then forward. But then begins another relationship, or maybe this can be described a different way, but in 1917, he meets Kamila Stoslova. And she was 26. He's 38 years older. He's like 53 or so. Mm-hmm. And basically, what it looks like when you read about this online, he becomes obsessive. He wants her to be his muse, more or less. And he writes her over 700 letters. That's like $300 in postage. I looked it up. Unfortunately, we don't have any responses from her. It can look like it's one-sided, but there was some type of friendship there.
There was. She accompanied him to trips to spa towns and what have you. They were friends, but just friends. I think he wanted it to be something more, but in common everyday parlance, he was in the friend zone, and that's where he stayed. Oh, but the music that she inspired, oh my goodness.
So after this, he starts writing a lot of music. He meets her, becomes very infatuated, writes her endlessly, and then he writes Katya Kabanova, one of the operas, and then also The Diary of One Who Disappeared. That's one I don't know really.
It's a song cycle, tenor and soprano, and it's if you ever have a chance to listen to it, it's very passionate.
I'll try to find a video performance and put it on the show notes page. Another opera, I love this one, and I've actually not even read the libretto. I've just been listening to it. The Cunning Little Vixen, completed in 1923. This, I think, becomes very important with what we're going to talk about in a little bit, but he creates so many varied and different sounds of animals and nature in ways that other composers weren't doing, I think, with this one.
It's almost a children's opera, but it isn't really.
No.
But I think it's like probably the first opera ever that was based on a newspaper cartoon.
That's fine. Imagine Garfield the opera.
There you go.
Yeah, but that is a good one. Also, string quartets, I'd recommend. Intimate Letters, I imagine that's also surrounding...
both string quartets, the later opera, the Macropolis Case, the Cunning Little Vixen, Katya Kabanova, the Diary of the One Who Disappeared. These were all works, masterpieces by Janacek that were all based on the love that he had for Kamila Stoslova.
And I think it was a year, maybe 2 years ago, I did mention the Intimate Letters Quartet was part of a recording I recommended for some summer listening. And I do recommend it, and quartets in general, because I think, Bill, you get a distillation of a composer with a string quartet because it's two violins, cello, viola, basically.
It's very intimate.
Yeah, and they have to say everything within that form, and then you get kind of like masses or requiems over the years. You get everyone using the same text in different ways. So it is amidst all of this success, basically in his final decade of his 50s into his 60s, that he reaches this recognition for the first time in his life. He gets he's awarded a couple of awards, one of them being an honorary doctorate, like the first one that university did. And he had a big international premiere, I think, with Sinfonietta. That came out in 1916. That's also related, I forget the actual story, it's related to the town of Brno.
Right, a military band that was playing in the park there. Yeah, the other thing, too, that's interesting, John, is that 1918 was roughly the year where Janacek really hit his stride and became the famous composer that he was.
Yeah.
At the same time that the new Republic of Czechoslovakia was founded. It's almost like the two things were linked together. Talk about a composer linked to the fate of his country.
Yeah, I've come to understand this much more, talking with you and others and talking about these composers, because like Verdi, I didn't realize how much he was involved, and also with Janacek as well, because they understand of writing music for their people. So that's basically coming right up to the end of his life. He continues this relationship, platonic relationship with Stoslova, and they, as you said, she would go on like some spa town trips, that whole European thing, and they were at like a nearby town, like going around like a walk on a lake.
Right.
August 1928, with her and her son. He got sick, pneumonia. He was dead by August 12th, at the age of 74. But it is a testament, Bill, to the idea that, or the fact that, an artistic journey is not a straight line.
No.
It's zigzags all over the place, and maybe in the final second you are recognized. But it's really not about you being recognized. It's much more than that. And actually, we're going to talk about why his music and how his music sounds different right after this. Okay, we mentioned before his interest in folk music and all those influences and stuff, but his interest in, I guess, folk went, it was much more than that. It wasn't just about music or the tones, but he was also interested in how, as humans, how are we communicating through speech, and how is it also more than just words? And so he actually sought to, in a similar way to transcribing the folk tunes, he was transcribing speech from everyday people in public, and he would use that information in the creative process. He called these speech melodies. And there's a great quote that I think just sets all of this up that Janacek said. Maybe you can read this for us, Bill.
Okay, this is what he said. Speech melodies, for me, the music that you hear from instruments, from literature, whether it's by Beethoven or whoever, there's not much truth in it. You see, it was rather odd. Whenever someone spoke to me, I might not understand the words, but that tonal cadence, I immediately knew what was inside him. I knew how he felt, if he was lying, if he was agitated. And if someone was talking to me in a conventional manner, I felt I heard that this person was weeping inside. The tones, the tonal cadence of human speech of all living creations contain the most profound truths for me. And that was a great need in my life. I've been collecting speech melodies since 1889. I have an enormous collection of them, and I'd like to emphasize that they are of great importance for dramatic music.
This is super interesting because he's going out and he's writing these speech melodies on paper, like literally like dictating down the rhythm, the notation, the date, the place, the age of the person, social status, atmosphere. He was trying to be, I guess, like quote unquote, as scientific as he possibly could. He made thousands of these, and he called them windows into the human soul.
This is one of the unique things about Janacek's music and his creative process. I can't think of any other composer that did that unless you go back to the Renaissance.
Yeah, and I think it's also an important aspect of creative development. People think that, if you're a painter, all you do is focus on these landscape paintings. But no, you may actually have 4,000 paintings of a rock,
right?
A study that you've done. And so I think this is similar to that. And actually, we can hear some of these right now because these have been acted out and recorded. And I'm taking these examples from leoshjanáček.eu. They also put them on YouTube. But the speech melodies that we're going to hear, they're spoken by a person of the same description that Janacek gave. And they also give you a background sound that you would find in that environment wherever Janacek heard this. So we have 3 to listen to. And because this is an audio podcast, I'll need to give some context, and I'll just do that for the first 2. And what I'll do is I'll say the phrase in English, then we'll hear the recording, and then I'm going to read the accompanying captions that describe, the place and the person. Then you hear it played on piano, and then it's repeated in Czech. But don't worry, it's not as convoluted as it sounds maybe as with that description. So let's start with this one. This is someone saying, well, it's about time.
Však už je čas.
Hookvaldi, August 26th, 1922, in a deer park close to 6 p.m. I meet some workers. I ask, going home from work already? One of them answers, well, it's about time.
Však už je čas.
I love that, Bill, that we have this.
That's perfect.
I mean, first off, that's just one sentence said by someone randomly in, we might say the middle of nowhere, but here we are a century later analyzing it and also hearing the music of it as well. But it's really plain and simple like that. You can hear the atmosphere of the background, and it's someone just saying, well, it's about time.
And, if you think about it in that sense, if you put yourself in that mind of it, it does sound musical the way people talk.
Yeah.
But we don't think about it because we're concentrating on what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get really into it, the way people talk, especially some people, depending on where they're from, there's a musical cadence to it. And Janacek was the one that honed in on that.
Yeah. And you can also, like, for example, you hear someone from the other side of the world, a totally different language, not even seeing them, so you're not even seeing body language. You can get an idea of this person speaking if they're happy or they're upset. If you're given a choice, for example, you can infer that from the tones. So here's another one, and I put these in order for a particular reason. This one is someone saying, I'm not doing badly.
Já se nemám zle.
Brno, July 24th, 1928, Cheshka Street. I'm not doing badly, said a smartly dressed girl around 16 years old with a bitter smile. She was walking with a lady who had a little girl in tow.
Já se nemám zle.
Now, this one is really interesting, isn't it?
Indeed.
Because do we believe her that she's not doing badly? I mean, it's like someone saying, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah, she just tossed it off and there's something else going on there. Okay, your follow-up question would be, all right, what's bothering you? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's not the idea that Janacek will hear someone say, like in an argument, oh, that's the lines I should use for my opera. I should use that exactly because that's what that's depicting. But I think it's more of a study of understanding, she's saying this, but something else is being depicted, not just in the words, but in the tones that infers perhaps the truth, so to speak. Okay, now this is the third one, and I'll make it a little more fun. We're having a lot of fun here, right? This will be a little more fun. I'm not going to say the phrase in English. This time we are just going to hear what is being communicated.
Pivo! Pivo!
So, quick, short, and to the point. When I hear that, Bill, my first thought is of like a notification sound. I mean, it sounds like your phone almost, or like the beginning of a commercial. They'll put one of those notifications to get your attention, and it's very annoying. This is someone here conveying something to someone else in shorthand. You can tell that this is like a signal or something. Now, you already know, because you've been there, you know what's being said here. We're going to hear it again, but this time I'm going to read out the captions, and I'll even tell you in English, like I did before, what she is saying. Beer, beer.
Pivo! Pivo!
Colin, January 9th, 1925. Waiter, beer, beer. Walking quickly alongside a train.
Pivo! Pivo!
Now, I think this also gets even more interesting, Bill, because this is a shorthand, right? I mean, the full sentence might be, hello, excuse me, Bill at the bar, I need one beer, 600 mils in a glass over at this table.
Yeah, but when you're thirsty, you just get to the one word. It's like water, water,
Yeah.
pivo, pivo.
Yeah, pivo, beer. So is that something you'll hear in Prague? If I want a beer, I can just go pivo?
Well, that's just it. That's the one word that people going to Prague or the Czech Republic, that's the one of the words that they learn before they go over,
Yeah.
because it's going to be very useful to them. Pivo, pivo, pivo. That would make a really good ringtone, by the way.
I mean, it would. It's almost like a vocal stem. Pivo, pivo. I'm going to be yelling that all the time now
There you
at
go.
stuff. But I think there is something to that. There is this shorthand that is conveying something much bigger. It's like when you're on the train and someone says, the conductor, tickets, tickets. If you're on the train, if you're on the other side of the car, like I've been without a ticket, and you hear them say that, you immediately pick up on that, and it's
Right.
like, well, I gotta move. Then you get up and you try to be surreptitious about it. I think there is something to the idea of that communication, and Janacek's trying to understand what that is. So it's again, that young girl is saying, "I'm not doing badly." It sounds like she's actually saying something else, and so. All of this for me, Bill, all of this kind of rambling here for me points to verismo, like real life opera, the idea that the real action and human emotions and problems are being depicted. And I think that is part of the study here, is understanding how these people are conveying emotions and ideas, and how does that play into the real life of doing that in music, I guess.
That's a very good analogy, actually, verismo.
So we can actually perhaps take this a little further. We have two little musical examples we can listen to that I think maybe exemplify this. Let's hear the opening of the opera Katya Kabanova. Is that right, Katya?
Katya Kabanova.
Katya Kabanova. So this is right after the introduction. It's Act 1, Scene 1, Zazarak. And I'm going to play this for you, but first I'll tell you the setting. We have two characters here, and the setting is a public park on the high bank of the Volga River with a distant view of the countryside. So as we listen to this, just think about, what emotions or attitudes or what is being depicted or said right here.
Zázrak, v skutku třeba říci, že zázrak. Klaszno, widzisz, bracho, 25 let, už denně se dívám na vol. A nemohu se vynadívat. No co? Neobyčejný pohled, ta krása, duše se raduje. To je to rozkoš.
So, two characters, two very different deliveries. And I wonder what everyone has thought. What did you think was being depicted here? I'll go ahead and tell you. There is this man, he sees this wonderful countryside vista, and he's saying, wonderful. You've got to admit, it's wonderful. Zazarak. It's almost cheesy how it's emphasized. And it's very flowery, very beautiful. And then the woman responds, what's so special? Quite monotone. He says again, how can you not be moved? It's so beautiful. And then she says, I suppose so. Again, a kind of monotone delivery. That is just a surface level of it. I think there's actually much more we can get into, Bill. I think maybe if I can have 30 seconds. To me, this is not a depiction of someone merely, I love this vista, and he's just exuberant and excited, and she is just kind of the downer. But I'm wondering, is it maybe the opposite in a way? This is a man who cannot rest. He's never happy. I don't know the opera, I'll just say that. But it sounds like someone who's not able to be in one place. They're always thinking of the next thing. They're always restless. And he can only be himself in these, or content in these specific situations, maybe like this vista where it's more overwhelming. And so he has this high state of arousal. He's the one being different. And she almost has to, maybe play a counterpart to it, but it's just there's some type of emotional baggage as well behind this. But so now, how about an opposite example? What would be the opposite of this? And one might be the opening of Aaron Copland's opera, The Tinderland, where this little girl, Beth, is imagining for a moment growing up.
When I grow up, will you take me to live in a big house with a big lawn? I'd like a fountain and a pool with lots of carrot fish. I'd like that, Daniel. We'll sit in a big swing, like's in the order catalog, and swing and swing and swing and swing.
I mean, what a different sound, right? I mean, Bill, this does not sound like real life. It doesn't sound like Verismo. I mean, have you ever heard a child talk like that? Or, I mean, if I see a movie and I see a kid talk like that, it's like, okay, that kid dies like immediately. There's no growing up for you, kid. This is over.
Well, it is an opera now.
Yeah, it's an opera. And it just feels very Andy Griffith in a way. I'm not trying to have a go. It's just they have two very different intentions.
Right.
And I think that is how Janacek is thinking about things a little bit differently, or as you said, it's just Janacek in a way. Something else that sticks out for this composer is how he uses tonality or harmony, and I think it's why we say he sounds original. He did not have these long, beautiful melodies like Antonin Dvorak or even Smetana. A lot of his music contains a lot of quick changes, less, fully melodic ideas, things that change, a lot of things in sections, a lot of repetition, a lot of ostinato, that repeating line. And one thing I think that a big part of the originality is the tonality. I think everyone listening understands the idea probably of, there's major keys and there's minor keys. Those are the two things we usually hear music in. And basically, when you're talking about that, you're thinking of a key like C major, and all of the notes in the chord progressions within this are stemming from and returning to this tonal center. And it's a focus on the key and a focus on functional harmony. But this is just a very small slice of what is available, because there's also what we can call modality, where the focus is on a scale, not a key. So we don't have that chord progression, functional harmony aspect that you'd find like in the development of like a symphony by Beethoven, for example, this progression through keys and ideas and preparing different transpositions and stuff.
I think it also gets back into what we were just talking about, speech. Speech tends to be angular and not necessarily flowing in that way. One voice, another voice. One of the things that he did when he was composing too, and it's one of the things that sort of gives that sort of angularity, for want of a better word, to his music, is that he tends to favor higher-pitched instruments and lower-pitched instruments, because think about it, that's more like the human voice. A man might be talking like this, a woman might be talking up here, or a child might be talking up here.
Yeah, I like that. That's very important. His orchestration as well. And we have another great quote here that maybe you can read, Bill, from Walter Piston, an American composer who wrote a lot of our music theory textbooks in the 20th century.
He said, "Tonality is the organized relationship of tones in music. This relationship implies a central tone with all other tones supporting it or tending toward it in one way or another. Modality refers to the choice of tones between which this relationship exists. Tonality is synonymous with key, modality with scale. In addition to the major, minor, and chromatic scales, an extremely large number of modes can be constructed in any tonality."
I love this because it's just a very clear-cut way of explaining this. Tonality, focusing on the key in those aspects. Modality, the relationship between the notes is what's being studied. Now, the last part's also interesting. An extremely large number of modes can be constructed. Well, we've got major and minor. How are these other things constructed? An easy example is if you take a scale, C major, you go up and down a C major scale, you get a C major scale. That's not a trick question. But if you start on a D and you play all the notes of the C major scale, but now you're starting and stopping on the D, that is what we would call Dorian or D Dorian, and that's not too unfamiliar because it's also used a lot in the blues. After that, we can keep going. What about E. If you start on E, go up and down, then all the notes of C major, that's Phrygian. Then it's Lydian, Mixolydian, then Aeolian, that's what we call minor, Aeolian, then Locrian, and then Ionian, which is major. You're right back at the beginning. So you can actually play 7 different scales using notes from just C major. And this is a really foundational aspect of Janacek's music. The last thing that maybe we can listen to, Bill, is the opening to his Sinfonietta. This has an opening like not a lot of other things, I think, right? It's pretty different.
It's very different.
It opens with like some of the worst things you can do in music theory 101 in school. You do this, you're getting a D. You know, you're writing in parallel fifths. Writing parallel fifths in your contrapunctus class is going to get you a lower grade. You don't do that. And then he writes a bunch of unison brass. Weird sound almost, because brass are not chorus instruments, we're solo instruments. Each person has a different note, a different part. It's not like violins playing together. So the orchestration is odd. The parallel fifths. What is the key? Do we have one? Are we leading to a tonal center? Are we just really focusing on the relationships between these different figures that are presented here in the brass and in the first movement? So that means we don't get that development in a symphonic way. But I think, Bill, this leads to beautiful opportunities because not to top and tail the Sinfonietta, but the end of it with the flutes, I don't know if you remember, just the twisting and turning. It is, it's beautiful.
It is. It's a very striking piece of music, and it's interesting. Back in 1969, a rock band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer, on their first album, did a song that basically the song borrowed the melody from the introduction to the Sinfonietta, that opening part of the Sinfonietta. Here's the neat thing. The name of that song was Knife Edge, and that perfectly describes the kind of composing that Janacek was doing. His music sort of exists on the knife edge, and I think that's what gives it its appeal and its sharpness.
I think that's very apt, and that's how we'll end. It's on a knife edge, and Janacek is just Janacek. So that was his life. You know, we learned some great things and some not so great things, but we also, I think, learned a bit about how he does sound different. His interest in speech melodies and how dramaticism can be written to music, and also the tonality aspect of it.
You reminded me, too, that Janacek focuses on the relationships between the notes, not a key. And that reminds me of something that another musical innovator from later in the 20th century said to his musicians. His name was Miles Davis, and he said, don't play the notes, play what's between the notes.
I love that. That's all I have for Janacek, Bill. Do you have anything else?
John, we got a lot of listening to do, and I would encourage listeners to explore Janacek's music. You will not be disappointed.
Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music. For more information on this episode, visit the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. You can send me comments and episode ideas to classicalbreakdown@weta.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review in your podcast app. I'm John Banther. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown from WETA Classical.